In getting to this late stage with so little clarity, you could say Theresa May is playing a dangerous game of roulette with the future of the country. But then she has few choices, and none of them easy. One scenario is that she lands a deal acceptable to her this side of Christmas. November, December, it doesn't matter. But most likely it would mean some concessions and some fudges, and probably an all-important year's extension to the transition period.
So I think there is going to have to be a backstop in the withdrawal agreement. It's going to have a customs union either for Northern Ireland or the United Kingdom. It's going to have to keep at least Northern Ireland in the single market for goods at least. That's going to be unpalatable in Westminster, but the way that the Prime Minister might try to square that circle is to say we're extending the transition period before all of this stuff comes into effect, which makes it even more likely that by that time we've negotiated something that we're more comfortable with that still keeps a soft border in Ireland.
There's a second scenario that talks drag right into the new year. It can happen, but we don't know where that would end, and a clock is ticking.
There are some people who think that talking well into the new year might actually be quite helpful for the government. And the reason for that is that the government's essential pitch when it comes back to Parliament with its deal is it's this or no deal. I think the worry is that if you push it too far, you get two major problems. First of all, there is just not time to pass the legislation in Westminster that you need to pass to give effect to this deal. Second of all, business is going to get incredibly tetchy.
The third scenario is that we head into the new year, we expect no deal at all. Obviously talks would continue, a deal might still follow, but both sides would ramp up the no deal preparation. In the end, these three scenarios do kind of blur into each other. Talks for another month or three, threats of no more talks. The process still has a long way to run, and that's before it even gets to the UK Parliament. Well, let's talk to Damien Green and Mairead McGuinness now. And I want to put to each of you this idea of another transition is really just kicking the can down the road. Damien Green, what changes in an extra year that allows this to solve the border of Northern Ireland that wouldn't be solved in 2 years?
I think an extra transition year would solve some problems, but not others. Among the other ones, it wouldn't solve.
There is only one problem.
Would be, well, you say that. I mean, if we're thinking about signing a full trade deal, then the longer, another year for that.
3 years. That needs 5, 6
well,
years.
Not necessarily. I mean, 3 years is better than 2 years for that. But I agree. I mean, there are two big problems. One, you still have the backstop issue, which I think has to be resolved in principle. And secondly, there's the money issue. The financial framework, the EU's budget, starts again on 2020. Now, if Britain is still in transition at that point, what happens about money? So I think that will be.
Well, they can hand us a bill, but we have no
issue.
say in what the bill is, apparently,
All
at
of
that
that,
stage.
yes.
Mairead McGuinness, this is really going to make a lot of people think this is just meant to be a transition that morphs into never leaving. We just stay. Look, Turkey's done it, isn't it? Turkey's still been going in for 3 decades. We can be leaving for the next 3 decades. Isn't that the plan?
Well, unless that is your plan, because the UK will leave the European Union at the end of March. The UK required and requested a transition or implementation period that was acceptable to the European Union. And I think what's emerging is a pragmatic proposal, because we do have a serious problem here. There is very little time to negotiate all of the detail that is required. So we either ignore the realities of running out of time, or we do, as Michel Barnier has done consistently and calmly, come forward with some helpful suggestions that might allow the parties reach that agreement that we all need to reach, mindful of the commitments that we have all entered into as far back as December, particularly on the sticking point of no hard borders on the island of Ireland. So you can describe it as kicking the can. I think that's a tabloid version of it. Or you can hear it as what it is, a proposal to help us make progress. And actually, I too appreciated the better mood music. I spoke to Antonio Tajani after his meeting with the Prime Minister Theresa May this evening, and he reflected that there was a sense in which the Prime Minister and the European Union want to reach an agreement. There isn't the substance there to do that, but there is a desire to do it, and time may be the ingredient.
Sorry, I do want to just cut you off. I don't want to hear again, we all want an agreement and we all mean well. Look, what changes on the Northern Irish border in 3 years? What changes on the Northern Irish border in 3 years that couldn't be resolved in 2 years? We're not going to sign an FTA, a free trade agreement, in 3 years. And if we do, it doesn't solve the Irish border unless it has us in a customs union permanently and in aligning our rules and regulations. So how do you see this? How do you see the transition ending and the Northern Ireland problem being resolved?
Well, first, before it ends, I'd like to see it begin, and I think that's the problem, that we don't have a withdrawal agreement. And remember, if the Irish backstop is not part of the withdrawal agreement, then there will be no withdrawal agreement. And then we are looking at some of those dark scenarios you painted as part of this programme. And recall absolutely the commitments made around the invisible border, no hard borders on the island of Ireland. And the difficulties that emerge around that are because of the red lines that were drawn by the British Prime Minister of leaving the customs union and single market. So here is the challenge. Can we, within a longer period, reach an end point where the backstop is not required? That's really what we're all trying to achieve here. And I'm interested to hear how this will be, if you like, accepted or reacted to in the United Kingdom.
I noticed that you have not been able to tell me how you think we escape the transition without entering backstop land. Let me go back to Damien, though. Let me go back to Damien. Do you support?
It's not my
Sorry,
job
let me just go back to Damien.
With respect to your question, it is not. No, but I mean, you can't just say that and not allow me speak.
Okay, come back
because
quickly.
It is not my job to say how the UK will escape, as you say. We're in a negotiation with the United Kingdom, and we both have to work towards an agreement.
Okay, point made. Damien Green, do you support an extension to the transition at this stage?
Well, it depends what the details are. I mean, as I say, it solves some problems but not others. I think the most important thing to come out tonight is indeed the change of mood music. There was some fear that actually this could be a very bad council at which it was said, we're cancelling the November Council, but we're keeping a no-deal council going.
Can I just ask you this? What on earth is the benefit of being in a transition for 3 years and then facing whatever we face when we come out, and no one seems to be able to specify how we'll come out after 3 years? What's better about that than just simply saying, tell you what, let's just stay in the EU for another 3 years? Because the only difference is that if we're in the EU, we have votes, and if we're not in the EU, we have no say over anything.
Well, we can't stay in the EU for a couple of reasons. One, we had a referendum, you may remember, at which people voted to leave. And secondly, Parliament's passed a law that says that we're leaving on March 31st. And I don't think trying to reverse that process would be at all sensible.
You make the point. You see the point, though, right? It's not just Brexit in name only. It is total membership of the EU, except no influence over any decision whatsoever.
Well, it's not total membership of the EU. There are clearly some things we would be outside. But I think, the most important thing, the reason why you might want to support an extra year, I'm, as you observe, ambivalent about this, is if actually you think you could reach the final agreement, so we wouldn't need to worry too much about the backstop and so on. And you've just asserted, as though a fact, that we can't possibly sign a free trade agreement in 3 years. I'm not sure that's a fact. I think it would be more possible in 3 years than 2 years by definition. And I think that actually maintaining the sense of forward progress is very good, because in the end, we need to reach a deal.
So kicking the can down the road has a purpose, because it gets you to the next
Well,
stage.
it only has a purpose if it gets you to the next stage. That's the point.
Right. We need to leave it there. Mairead McGuinness, there's so much more I'd like to ask you.
Could I just make
very quickly.
But I just think I have to make one point. Remember, we're in this difficulty because of the lack of preparation. When you were having your referendum, you didn't understand the difficulties and the consequences of that vote and how it will be implemented. And I'm afraid there's been a steep learning curve, and we're on a journey together, and we have to reach a good end game. So let's try and keep some optimism, but also realise that this could still go wrong.
OK, Mairead McGuinness and Damien Green, thanks both very much indeed. Well, before I speak to Nigel Farage, let's have a listen to what the Lithuanian president had to say on her way into the summit.
It's very difficult for European side to negotiate with a person who has no full support of the position. It's changing, it's under discussions, and that's a problem. If you have on another side of the table negotiator who has no strong mandate, it's very difficult to negotiate.
Well, I'm joined by Nigel Farage, former UKIP leader, of course, chairman of Leave Means Leave. Very good evening to you. We heard there that the British are not really prepared, didn't work out all the ramifications. And she obviously has a point, because we really don't even know what we want yet as a nation. I know you know what you want, but as a nation we don't. And we're on the day we're meant to be agreeing a final deal.
Well, I couldn't disagree more. The Prime Minister has a huge mandate. It was called a referendum, the greatest exercise in democracy ever in the history of our nation, won by a very good, strong, clear margin. And let's just remind people, every single major player on both the Leave and the Remain side said the consequence of a Leave vote would be we leave the European Union, the single market, and the customs union. It couldn't be clearer, and there was a transition period called Article 50 of 2 years through which all of this was to be sorted out.
OK, so I understand where you're coming from with that, but people might have heard, and if they hadn't listened in the referendum campaign very carefully, and I know a lot of people didn't, they might have heard what you said about Norway and Switzerland before the referendum campaign, that they're rich, they're happy, they're self-governing. Aaron Banks,
yes,
your sidekick, said
right.
The Norway option looks best for the EU in 2015. People might have heard all of that and not paid very close attention to the nuances in the campaign about what the customs union policy or single market policy would be.
Well, I tell you what voters did understand. That the referendum was about one thing, very clearly, whether we became an independent nation that left the European Union or not. We voted to do so, and the problem is we have a Prime Minister who is a Remainer, who has once again come to a European summit and humiliatingly agreed that she's prepared to sign up for a further year of transition and another £20 billion of UK taxpayers' money. The problem isn't Brexit. The problem is the Prime Minister.
Well, she hasn't agreed to the transition extension yet. But look, you're saying that
she's offered it. She's offered it. If, you know, in return for some minor concession on the so-called Irish border problem, that's what she's put on the table tonight.
But you said the public voted to be an independent nation. In years before the referendum, you believed Norway and Switzerland were independent nations. So it's not
No,
as clear
I believe
cut.
Norway. Now, hang on a second.
You said they're
that
rich,
Norway
they're happy, they're
catch
self-governing.
their own fish.
You said
Yes, of course they are. And they've got their own arrangements, but they are tiddly little countries who found their own relationship with the European Union. We are a country of 65 million plus people, the fifth or sixth biggest economy in the world, choosing whatever measure you want, and we voted to become independent. And this Prime Minister is doing her utmost by agreeing potentially to extend transition to make sure that this now rolls into the next general election so that we may never leave the European Union properly. This is a betrayal of Brexit, and it's about time the Tory party stood up and got rid of her.
Yeah, but Chequers is much lighter involvement than Norway or Switzerland has. You've already said they're self-governing. Chequers involves no free movement,
sorry, you're
which
missing,
Norway and
Evan,
Switzerland have. No, but you said
you
they
are
were
missing the point entirely. You are missing the point entirely. Switzerland and Norway have sorted out their own arrangements. We need to sort out our own arrangement.
Yeah, but the Prime Minister's
we,
trying to do
in
that
that
with
referendum,
Chequers. And you're not supporting her. You're saying
we
Chequers is
in that referendum, because of what the Prime Minister said, David Cameron, and that leaflet that came through every single one of our doors in Milan at a cost of £9 million to the taxpayer, that leaflet made it clear. If you vote to leave, you are leaving the customs union, you are leaving the single market, and if you choose to do this, we will implement your decision. This isn't about arguments on the economy, arguments on investment, arguments on trade. This is about trust of the British people in their governing classes to deliver what they were promised. That is now what Brexit is really all about.
Nigel Farage, thanks very much for joining us. Thank you very much. Well, we haven't gone through the parliamentary arithmetic tonight, one thing at a time, but there is a bit of a row about whether MPs will get a simple take it or leave it vote on any deal, or get the chance to chuck in ideas of their own by amending any motion on the deal when it comes to the Commons, maybe suggesting a referendum or a delay or whatever. Well, the government want the vote to be clean of such complications. With me in the studio now is a man who's seen more Conservative Party scraps over Europe than possibly anyone else, and has in fact been involved in most of them. Former Chancellor Ken Clarke. Very good evening. Let's just start with this extended transition, because it does feel like a plot to basically extend it forever.
Unlike Nigel blustering away and claiming suddenly the referendum was all about the single market and the customs union, which it certainly wasn't, the fact is it'll take you much longer than 2 years to arrange all the new arrangements going to replace the ones we've had. We've thrived in the European Union, and we've developed into one of the more powerful players in a rules-based international order, a globalised economy, everybody's trade arrangements are based on hugely complex agreements.
We're
scrapping the ones we've had for 45 years. It will take you several years to negotiate the new ones. The Canada deal, which is currently fashionable with the Eurosceptics, took about 7 or 8 years,
right.
I think.
But the point is...
putting the transition back by a year is a perfectly safe bet. Don't worry, you won't have finished it all by then.
You won't have finished it by then. And you won't have solved the Northern Ireland backstop problem. It'll just come back to hit us again, won't it?
Well, you've got to solve that now. That's the withdrawal agreement. That's the thing that's holding up all progress.
But the issue of the Northern Ireland border will come up when we start discussing the trade agreement.
Well, you've got to settle it now, which will determine how you then proceed to negotiate the other agreements. I mean, then once you've determined that you're guaranteeing a Northern Ireland border for the foreseeable future, it's not time limited.
So I want to be clear.
We couldn't possibly break the Good Friday Agreement, and actually all the governments keep saying they're totally committed to no new infrastructure, no barriers.
The backstop is going to come into effect. Where I want to get to is, do you think the backstop will be the front stop by the time we get to the end of the transition?
I just think we just have to say that for as long as it takes, we're not going to make the terrible error of restoring a hard border in Ireland. It was symbolic effect would be catastrophic. We've ended years and years of violence and troubles with the Good Friday Agreement, and the British don't break commitments like that.
Let's talk about the issue of the vote. When this comes to the Commons, assuming there's a deal, the government want it to be sort of take it or leave it, deal or no deal, and they'll leave it as late as possible so there's no time to prepare for no deal, so it'll be kind of take it, basically. Do you think MPs should be able to amend that motion?
Yeah, I mean, they've lost that argument once. They got defeated the last time they tried to devise what the current cliché phrase is a meaningful vote, and this is the latest silly tactic, which they won't get away with.
But I thought they won the vote last time. Dominic Grieve tried to put a meaningful vote amendment in. You voted for it. But ultimately, they got away with it.
But they accepted the meaningful vote, and we did defeat them on aspects of a meaningful vote, actually. And Parliament is going to insist on having its proper authority. That's the problem. If you just left it to the politicians, diplomats and officials in the governments, the 27 and ourselves could reach an agreement, probably a month or two more, but they'd be there. They'd have everything. It's can Theresa sell any sensible agreement in Parliament? The moment,
what would the amendment be you'd be looking for if you could amend it? What is it? It's a second referendum? It's a delay, or what is it?
I want to look at the agreement first. I don't know how I'd want to amend it, but what we can't have is take it or leave it. This is the best we've got, and so you make a choice. Do you take this, or is it no deal and chaos, which nobody wants?
Brings us to the issue,
and that is us just avoiding proper parliamentary scrutiny and debate, and Parliament's probably going to want to give some detailed instructions to the government and to temper its approval with some conditions
which brings us
Parliament requires.
Brings us to the issue of the role of the Speaker, because many on your side of this argument believe John Bercow is favourably disposed to everything you're saying and they want to keep him there, even though he was implicitly criticised by a report into bullying and harassment at the House of Commons earlier this week. Do you think his position is tenable?
There's nothing, if you listen to the judge who did it, there's nothing in this report that justifies the removal of John Bercow. I'm not in favour. He's just we have to have a witch hunt week in the modern media. It's all nonsense removing Bercow. The Speaker has a duty to Parliament. The one way in which he's a very good Speaker is he does allow Parliament its say. He does make government accountable. He accepts some of my Conservative colleagues as he won't just comply with what the government wishes. Some of the most serious discussions we have in the House of Commons are because he allows urgent questions and contemporary stuff. So the Speaker's nothing to do with it.
Sounds like Remain politics is clouding your judgment there.
It's parliamentary sovereignty. I've never known a more pathetic Parliament. The Parliament has so far failed to exercise any real influence over events. That's why you have referendums to neutralise parliaments and parties and things. Both parties are shattered and hopelessly divided, can't agree even amongst themselves, and you can't get an agreement in Brussels which can get a majority in the cabinet or can shut up the Brexiteers. Parliament's got to start functioning properly. With a weak government in this delicate situation, in the end, we're a parliamentary democracy. I don't think we should have decided all this with one daft opinion poll. I want to see parliamentary democracy function properly, and this amendment will be catastrophic.
So
I mean,
much
the
that,
government
so
can't
much
understand that.
we could talk about there. We have no time. Ken Clarke, thank you very much indeed.